Adult ADHD for women. From scattered to centered. Master your focus, build habits that stick, and reclaim your calm without losing your spark. By Marlow Hayes. Introduction. In March 1902, a doctor named Sir George Still stood before a room full of very serious men in London. The air was likely thick with the smell of old books and coal smoke. He was there to give a talk at the Royal College of Physicians. He had been watching 43 children who shared a strange set of traits. These children were smart, they were healthy, yet they could not seem to pay attention or control their bodies for more than a few minutes at a time. Still told the other doctors that these children had a morbid defect of moral control. He didn't have the tools we have today. He couldn't see inside a living brain, so he made a guess based on what he saw. He thought these children simply lacked the goodness or the willpower to behave like everyone else. He described them as having an abnormal incapacity for sustained attention. This was the very first time anyone in the medical world tried to name what we now call ADHD. But because it started with words like moral defect, a heavy weight was placed on the shoulders of anyone who felt this way. For over 100 years, the world didn't see a biological difference. They saw a character flaw. They saw someone who just wasn't trying hard enough. If you are a woman living with ADHD today, you are still carrying the ghost of Sir George Still's speech. You might not know his name, but you know the feeling. You feel it when you look at a pile of laundry that has been sitting on the clean chair for 5 days. You feel it when you realize you missed another email from your boss. You feel it when you find yourself standing in the middle of the kitchen, holding a spatula, but having no idea what you were about to do. The weight of the invisible struggle. For most women, ADHD doesn't look like a little boy running circles around a classroom. It looks like a masking tornado. On the outside, you might look like you have it all together. You show up to work. You take care of your family. You smile at the neighbors. But inside, your brain feels like a browser with 50 tabs open, and 3 of them are playing music you can't find. Everything feels like a struggle. Tasks that seem easy for other people, like paying a bill on time or keeping a calendar, feel like trying to climb Mount Everest in flip-flops. You spend your life masking. This means you use every ounce of your energy to hide your struggles, so people won't think you are lazy, stupid, or broken. By the end of the day, you are exhausted. You aren't just tired from working, you are tired from the effort of pretending to be normal. You live in a constant state of emergency mode, waiting for the next ball to drop. You might feel like a fraud, worried that if people saw the real state of your junk drawer or your inbox, they would realize you aren't the adult you pretend to be. This book is here to tell you that Sir George Still was wrong. Your struggle is not a moral failing. It is not a lack of willpower. It is a biological reality. Your brain is wired differently, and that difference comes with both a cost and a very special kind of spark. The promise of a new path. You're about to go on a journey from being a masking tornado to becoming a radiant pilot. A pilot doesn't stop the wind from blowing. A pilot doesn't change the weather. Instead, a pilot understands the plane, reads the instruments, and knows how to navigate through the clouds to find the clear blue sky. By the time you finish these pages, you will have a toolkit made specifically for your brain. You won't find advice here that tells you to just buy a planner. Planners are great, but they don't work if your brain's secretary has gone on strike. Instead, you will learn how to stop the cycle of shame and replace it with science. Build systems that work with your interest-based nervous system instead of against it. Manage your emotions so they don't feel like a roller coaster you can't get off. Reclaim your time using external brains so you don't have to rely on a memory that sometimes fails you. Keep your creativity and your passion without the chaos that usually follows them. This isn't about fixing you because you aren't broken. This is about learning the manual for the high-powered machine you were born with. Why this works. The strategies in this book aren't just guesses. They are based on decades of research into how the female brain handles executive function. In 1972, a researcher named Dr. Virginia Douglas changed everything. She argued that ADHD wasn't about wiggling, it was about the weight, the inability to stop and think before acting. Later, in the 1990s, brain scans showed that the ADHD brain actually uses energy differently. It's not that you don't want to focus, it's that the fuel your brain needs to stay on task isn't always available in the right places at the right times. When you understand the biology, the shame starts to melt away. You realize you haven't been failing at life. You've been playing a game where the rules were written for someone else's brain. We are going to rewrite those rules. Meeting Maya, To see how this works in the real world, we are going to follow the story of a woman named Maya Reynolds. Maya is 38 years old and lives in Seattle. If you met her at a coffee shop, you would think she was a superstar. She is a senior marketing director at a tech firm. She is bright, funny, and can come up with a brilliant idea in 5 seconds. But Maya is hiding a secret. It is Tuesday morning, 7:45 a.m. Maya is standing in her kitchen, and she feels like she is drowning. Her 6-year-old is crying because he can't find his favorite socks. Her 9-year-old is asking for a permission slip that Maya knows is somewhere in the doom pile of mail on the counter. Her phone vibrates. It's a message from her boss, asking why she isn't on the 7:30 a.m. conference call. Maya stares at a half-packed lunchbox. She has a piece of bread in one hand and a juice box in the other. But she is frozen. Her brain feels like a thick fog. She can't decide what to do first. Do the socks matter more than the meeting? Where is that permission slip? She looks down and sees an old to-do list from 3 months ago sticking out from under a bowl of fruit. None of the items are crossed off. In that moment, the shame hits her like a physical blow. She thinks, I am a defective adult. If my husband or my coworkers saw how much I'm struggling just to make a sandwich, they'd realize I'm a fraud. Maya is a masking tornado. She spends her whole day at work being on, but when she gets home, she has nothing left. She is brilliant at her job, but can't remember school spirit days. She loves her family, but feels like she is constantly letting them down. She is tired of living in emergency mode. Throughout this book, we will follow Maya as she learns to stop apologizing for her brain and starts designing a life that actually fits it. You will see her move from the chaos of that Tuesday morning to a place where she feels centered, calm, and in control. The roadmap ahead. Our journey together is broken into steps that build on each other. We will start by looking at the internal weather report. This is a way to understand why your focus and energy change from day to day. You will learn why your brain is like a wide-angle lens that sees everything at once, and how to use that as a strength. We will talk about the architecture of now, not now. This is the secret to understanding why time feels so slippery for people with ADHD. You will learn how to make the future visible so it doesn't surprise you. We will also look at the lives of 3 amazing women from history who likely shared your ADHD spark. Eleanor Roosevelt, who went from a shy, overwhelmed young wife to a world leader by building systems that managed her high energy. Hedy Lamarr, a famous movie star, who used her restless butterfly mind to invent the technology that makes Wi-Fi and Bluetooth possible today. Dr. Mary Walker, a Civil War surgeon who refused to follow the rules and used her one-track mind to save lives and change the world. These women show us that having a brain that works differently isn't a barrier to greatness. In fact, it might be the reason for it. We will also tackle the big feelings. You will learn about rejection-sensitive dysphoria, which is why a small piece of criticism can feel like a punch in the gut. We will look at how to manage the ADHD tax, the money we lose to late fees and impulse buys. Finally, we will look at how to build a support system. You will see how Maya learns to talk to her husband, David, about her needs without feeling like a burden. You will learn how to delegate the things that drain you, so you have energy for the things that light you up. This book is not about becoming a different person. It is about becoming the most centered version of the person you already are. It is about keeping your spark, your creativity, your humor, and your quick mind, while letting go of the shame and the chaos. The fog in Maya's kitchen is starting to lift, and yours can too. It's time to stop trying to be a normal person and start being a radiant pilot. Chapter 1. Why does my brain work this way? The tires of Maya's SUV screeched just inches from the bumper of the silver sedan in front of her. For a split second, the world turned into a frozen photograph. She could see the tiny scratches on the other car's trunk. She could hear the pulse thumping in her own neck like a trapped bird. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so hard, her knuckles turned white. She had been thinking about the grocery list. Then she was thinking about a song from a commercial. Then she was wondering if she had remembered to turn off the coffee pot. In those few seconds of mental wandering, she had almost caused a pileup on the highway. Maya pulled over to the shoulder, her heart still racing. She wasn't texting, she wasn't tired. She was just gone. Her mind had simply stepped out of the room for a moment, leaving no one at the wheel. This was the near miss that finally broke her. It wasn't just a forgotten lunch or a late bill anymore. Her brain was a flighty, unreliable witness to her own life. And she finally had to know why. For a long time, the The world thought they knew exactly what a broken focus looked like. If you asked a doctor in the 1950s or 60s, they would describe a very specific person. They would point to a little boy, maybe 7 years old, who couldn't sit in his chair. He was the kid jumping off the back of the couch, running until he hit a wall, and constantly interrupting the teacher. They called it hyperkinetic reaction of childhood. To the doctors of that time, the problem was the legs. The problem was the noise. But in March of 1972, a woman named Virginia Douglas stood up in Montreal, Canada, and told the medical world they were looking at the wrong body parts. Virginia was a researcher who didn't just watch how kids moved. She watched how they thought. She noticed something that everyone else had missed. These children didn't just have too much energy. In fact, many of them could sit very still if they were doing something they loved. The real issue wasn't the wiggling. The real issue was the weight. She argued that the core of the problem was an inability to keep attention on a task that wasn't immediately exciting. She called it a deficit in sustained attention and impulse control. This changed everything. By moving the focus from the legs to the mind, she opened a door. If the problem was about attention and not just running around, then maybe people who weren't running around could have it too. Maybe girls who sat quietly in the back of the room, staring out the window and dreaming of faraway lands, were struggling with the exact same thing as the boy jumping off the couch. This was the birth of the cognitive model. It was the first time anyone suggested that ADHD was a brain boss problem. This discovery was the first step toward understanding why a woman like Maya could be a brilliant marketing director but still almost crash her car because she was thinking about a coffee pot. The myth of the bad boy brain. Most of us grew up believing a very specific lie. We believed that ADHD was something you could see from across the street. We thought it looked like a tornado in a striped t-shirt. Because of this, millions of women spent decades thinking they were just flaky, emotional, or lazy. We need to bust this myth right now. ADHD is not a behavior problem. It is a biological fuel problem. Think of your brain like a car. Most people have a car that gets a steady stream of gasoline. When they see a red light, their brakes work perfectly. When they need to go up a hill, like doing taxes or folding laundry, the engine gets the extra power it needs to climb. A woman with ADHD has a high-performance sports car engine, but the fuel line is pinched. Sometimes the gas flows in a huge rush, and she can drive 200 miles per hour. This is called hyperfocus. Other times the fuel line goes dry right when she's facing a steep hill. No matter how hard she pushes the pedal, the car won't move. To the people standing on the side of the road, it looks like she's just refusing to drive. But on the inside, she is floorboarding the gas, smelling the engine smoke, and wondering why her car won't work like everyone else's. This is the executive function gap. It is the distance between knowing what to do and actually doing it. Maya knew she needed to watch the road. She knew she needed to finish the performance reviews for her team. She is a smart, capable adult. But her brain boss, the part of the brain right behind the forehead called the prefrontal cortex, doesn't always have the fuel to keep the brakes on or the gas steady. In 1990, a scientist named Dr. Alan Zamakin proved this with pictures. He took PET scans of adult brains. These scans show how the brain uses glucose, which is basically brain sugar or fuel. He found that in people with ADHD, the brain was literally cooler in the areas that control attention and movement. It was using fuel slower. When Maya saw those scans later in life, she cried. For 38 years, she thought her scatteredness was a flaw in her character. She thought she just didn't care enough. But the pictures showed the truth. Her brain was simply working with a different power grid. The internal weather report. To understand how this feels on a daily basis, it helps to stop looking at your brain as a static machine and start looking at it like the weather. This is what we call the internal weather report. Most people wake up to a partly cloudy or sunny day most of the time. They can see the road ahead. But for a woman with ADHD, the weather changes without warning. One morning, Maya wakes up and it's a high-pressure system. She is electric. She cleans the whole kitchen, sends 20 emails, and feels like she could run for mayor. Everything is clear. The next morning, she wakes up and a dense fog has rolled in. She stands in the middle of the kitchen holding a spoon, and she cannot remember why. She knows she has work, but the visibility in her mind is so low she can't see the first step. This isn't just a metaphor. It's a description of how dopamine works in your brain. Dopamine is the chemical that helps us feel reward and motivation. In an ADHD brain, dopamine is like a fickle sun. When it's out, you can do anything. When it's behind the clouds, even the simplest task like putting a dish in the dishwasher feels like trying to hike through waist-deep mud in a rainstorm. Maya's turning point. Maya sat in a small, quiet doctor's office. She had her hands tucked under her thighs to keep her from shaking. She had spent her whole life masking, pretending she had it all together while her internal world was a mess of post-it notes and I'm sorry emails. The doctor looked at Maya's intake forms. He saw her high grades in college. He saw her big job title. Then he looked at the symptoms section. Maya had checked every single box. Do you lose your keys often? Yes. Do you struggle to finish projects? Yes. Do you feel driven by a motor or internally restless? Always. Do you feel a deep sense of shame about your home life? Maya had circled this one 3 times. Maya, the doctor said, you aren't lazy. You have a low stimulation threshold. Your brain is essentially starving for dopamine, so it's always looking for the next thing that might provide it. That's why you get distracted. Your brain is trying to find the fuel it needs to stay awake. Maya felt a strange sensation in her chest. It was the feeling of a heavy backpack being lifted off her shoulders. She had spent years calling herself defective. She had spent years trying to use planners and willpower to fix a problem that was actually about her brain's chemistry. The doctor told her that she had an interest-based nervous system. This is a key concept for every woman with ADHD. Most people have an importance-based system. If a task is important, like taxes, they can do it. But Maya's brain doesn't care if a task is important. It only cares if the task is interesting, new, challenging, or urgent. This is why Maya could spend 6 hours straight designing a beautiful PowerPoint for work, interesting and challenging, but couldn't spend 10 minutes opening the mail, boring and not urgent. Her brain wasn't broken. It was just picky about its fuel sources. The hunter in a world of farmers. Why would nature create a brain like this? If ADHD makes it hard to do things like sit still and pay bills, why is it so common? In 1993, a writer named Thom Hartmann came up with a theory that helps many women stop feeling like errors and start feeling like evolutions. He called it the hunter versus farmer hypothesis. For thousands of years, humans survived as hunters and gatherers. In that world, having ADHD traits was a massive advantage. Imagine you are a hunter in the woods. You need to have a wide-angle lens for your attention. You need to notice the slight rustle of a leaf, distractibility. You need to be ready to sprint at a moment's notice, hyperactivity. You need to make a split-second decision to throw your spear, impulsivity. In the woods, a hunter brain keeps the tribe alive. Then, the world changed. We became farmers. Farming requires a very different kind of brain. You have to do the same thing every day. You plant the seeds, you wait months, you pull the weeds, you harvest. It is slow, repetitive, and requires a narrow-angle lens. The modern world, with its cubicles, its 9-to-5 schedules, and its mountain of paperwork, is a farmer's world. But some of us still have hunter brains. Maya wasn't a bad farmer. She was a misplaced hunter. Her ability to see 5 things at once and her hyperfocus were survival skills that just didn't fit into a world of spreadsheets and car insurance renewals. The shadow of Eleanor Roosevelt. Even before we had a name for ADHD, we could see it in the lives of powerful women. Eleanor Roosevelt is a perfect example. Today, we remember her as a calm, steady leader. But in her early years, she struggled with what people called nervous exhaustion. Eleanor had a massive amount of energy. She was always moving, always writing, and always deeply sensitive to the world around her. But she lived in a Victorian farmer world. She was expected to be a quiet wife who managed a household with perfect grace. She felt scattered and inadequate. She often fell into the blues, those low-pressure weather systems where her energy just vanished. It wasn't until Eleanor found her hunter mission, fighting for human rights and traveling the world, that her ADHD-like traits became her greatest strength. She used her restless energy to visit coal mines and soldiers. She used her wide-angle attention to see the problems of thousands of different people. Eleanor didn't fix herself by trying to be a better farmer. She fixed her life by building a world that needed a hunter. This is the same journey Maya was starting. It wasn't about learning to love spreadsheets. It was about learning how to manage her hunter brain so she could thrive in a farmer world without losing her spark. The hope in the wiring. If you are reading this and feeling like Maya, if you've had your own near misses and your own foggy mornings, there is something you need to hear. Your brain is not a problem to be solved. It is a system to be understood. ADHD in women is often invisible because we are so good at masking. We learn to smile and nod while our brains are screaming. We learn to stay up until 2 a.m. to finish the work we couldn't start at 2 p.m. We carry a shame tax that we pay every single day. But the science tells us a different story. The PET scans, the research by Virginia Douglas, and the Hunter hypothesis all point to the same truth. You have a brain that is wired for high-octane interest and rapid-fire scanning. You have a brain that is glucose-hungry and dopamine-seeking. When you stop trying to willpower your way into being a farmer, you can start building the scaffolding you actually need. You stop saying, "I just need to try harder." You start saying, "I need to make this task more interesting, so my brain will give me the fuel to do it." This shift is the difference between a life of scatteredness and a life of centeredness. It starts with the no-fault approach. Just as you wouldn't blame a car for running out of gas, you cannot blame yourself for having a brain that uses fuel differently. The historical echo. The story of Virginia Douglas in 1972 is still happening today. Every time a woman walks into a doctor's office and says, "I'm not depressed, I'm just overwhelmed," she is echoing Virginia's bravery. Every time a mother realizes that her messy house isn't a sign that she's a failure, but a sign that her executive function is taxed, she is breaking a century-old cycle of shame. The medical world is finally catching up to what Virginia Douglas suspected 50 years ago. They are realizing that ADHD in women isn't about being hyper. It's about the quiet, internal struggle to manage a brain that is always looking for the spark. Maya left the doctor's office that day with a prescription, but more importantly, she left with a map. She understood for the first time why she almost hit that car. It wasn't because she was a bad person or a bad driver. It was because her internal weather was foggy and her fuel line was dry. As she drove home, this time with her music off and her eyes focused, she didn't feel like a masking tornado anymore. She felt like a pilot who had finally been given the manual for her own plane. The flight would still be bumpy. There would still be storms. But for the first time in her life, Maya knew why the plane worked the way it did. And that knowledge was the first step toward reclaiming her calm. You are not broken. You are not less than. You are a person with a hunter's brain living in a farmer's world. And once you understand the biology of your spark, you can stop fighting your brain and start leading it. The first step is simply to look at your history, the missed deadlines, the lost keys, the dreamy report cards, and say, "It wasn't my fault, it was my wiring." From that place of no fault, we can begin to build a life that doesn't just fit your ADHD, but actually celebrates the unique, brilliant power of your interest-based mind. The fog is starting to lift. The visibility is getting better. It's time to start the engine and drive toward the life you were actually meant to live. Chapter 2. Masking. The heavy price of fitting in. From a high-up window over New York City in 1905, you would see a sea of black hats and long dresses moving in a perfect, steady rhythm. People walked with purpose. They knew where they were going. They followed the rules of the sidewalk and the rules of the drawing room. If you watched long enough, you would see a young woman stepping out of a carriage. To anyone watching from above, she looked exactly like everyone else. She wore the right silk dress, she held her head at the right angle, she smiled when a neighbor passed. But if you could zoom in and see behind her eyes, the picture would change. Inside her mind, things were not moving in a steady rhythm. They were swirling like a storm. She was constantly checking a mental list of things she was supposed to do, things she was supposed to say, and ways she was supposed to act. She was working twice as hard as anyone else, just to look like she was doing nothing at all. This woman was Eleanor Roosevelt, and she was trapped inside a very expensive, very polite cage. The weight of the Victorian mask. In the early years of her marriage, Eleanor was living a life that someone else had designed for her. Her mother-in-law, Sarah, was a woman who believed in absolute order. Everything in the house had a place. Every hour of the day had a task. For a woman with a brain that craved movement and deep meaning, this was like being told to sit still in a dark room for 5 years. Eleanor tried with all her might to be the perfect wife. In the early 1900s, that meant managing a large home, hosting fancy dinners, and never showing a hint of struggle. To the outside world, she was succeeding. She appeared calm, she appeared organized. But this was a performance. She was masking. Masking is what happens when you hide your true self to fit into a world that wasn't built for you. For Eleanor, it meant forcing herself to care about seating charts and wallpaper patterns when her mind was actually racing with ideas about social justice and education. It meant staying quiet when she felt like screaming from boredom. She called her periods of sadness the blues, but looking back with what we know today about ADHD, it looks a lot more like burnout. The cost of this performance was huge, because she spent every ounce of her energy pretending to be a conventional socialite. She had nothing left for herself. She felt inadequate and shy. She felt like a fraud. She was checking all the boxes, but the boxes were crushing her. This is the invisible struggle that so many women with ADHD face today. You might get the kids to school on time, finish your reports at work, and even remember to bring a salad to the potluck. But if you had to use every bit of your willpower just to keep from falling apart, you aren't just doing life. The science of hiding in plain sight. For a long time, doctors thought ADHD was something only boys had. They looked for the kid jumping off the back of the couch or running circles in the classroom. They didn't look for the girl sitting quietly at her desk, staring out the window, or the woman who is always 5 minutes late but works until midnight to make up for it. In 2017, a researcher named Meng Chuan Lai looked into why women are diagnosed so much later than men. He found something called social camouflage. It turns out that girls and women are often much better at hiding their struggles than boys are. From a very young age, girls are taught to be helpers and pleasers. We are taught that being loud, messy, or forgetful is a moral failure. So, we learn to hide. We learn to mirror the people around us so we know how to act. Prep scripts in our heads before we go into a meeting or a party. Check our bags 5 times to make sure we hadn't lost our keys again. Stay silent in groups because we are afraid we will blurt out something weird. This hiding works, but it comes with a masking tax. Think of your brain like a phone battery. Most people start their day at 100%. If they go to a party, maybe it drops to 80%. But for a woman with ADHD, just the act of pretending to be normal at that party takes a huge amount of power. By the time she gets home, her battery isn't at 80%. It's at 2%. She is hollowed out. When you mask, you are telling your brain that your natural way of being is wrong. You are telling yourself that if people saw the real you, the one with the messy car, the unfinished projects, and the brain that jumps from topic to topic, they wouldn't like you. The false sunny forecast. We can think about masking through the lens of the internal weather report. When you are masking, you are putting out a false sunny forecast. To your boss, your friends, and even your partner, you look like a clear, bright day. You say, "I'm fine," and "I've got it under control." But inside, the air pressure is dropping. The clouds are gathering. Because you are pretending it's sunny, you aren't prepared for the rain. You don't ask for an umbrella. You don't seek shelter. Eventually, the storm hits. This usually looks like a sudden meltdown over something small, like a broken shoelace or a spilled glass of milk. Your family might be confused. "Why are you so upset about a glass of milk?" they ask. They don't see that the milk wasn't the problem. The problem was the 6 hours of sunny performance you had to give while a hurricane was building in your mind. Maya's night at the dinner party. Maya Reynolds stood on the porch of a beautiful house in Seattle, her hand hovering over the doorbell. She was wearing a dress she had ironed at the very last second. Her hair was perfect. On the outside, she was the senior marketing director of a top tech firm. She was a success. But her heart was hammering against her ribs. She had just realized, standing on that porch, that the expensive bottle of wine she had bought as a gift for the hostess was still sitting on her kitchen counter, 30 miles away. "I am a failure," she thought. "Everyone else remembered their gifts. Everyone else is inside laughing and drinking, and I'm out here being a mess." She felt the urge to turn around, get in her car, and drive home. She could text and say she felt sick. It would be easier to lie than to walk in empty-handed and admit she had forgotten. That was her mask talking. Her mask told her that a real adult doesn't forget things. She thought about her internal weather report. Right now, it was a thick, gray fog of shame. She decided to do something she had never done before. She pushed the doorbell. When the hostess, Sarah, opened the door, Maya didn't wait. She didn't make up a story about the wine being backordered or stolen from her car. "Sarah, I am so happy to be here," Maya said, her voice shaking just a little. "But I have to tell you, I bought you a great bottle of wine and then left it sitting right on my counter. My brain just skipped a gear tonight." Sarah laughed and pulled her into a hug. "Oh my gosh, Maya. Please don't worry. Last week I went to the grocery store for dinner ingredients and came home with nothing but light bulbs and cat food. I forgot the actual food." For the first time in years, Maya felt a tiny bit of the weight lift. By admitting she had messed up, she didn't have to spend the whole night pretending to be perfect. She had unmasked just a little bit, and the world didn't end. In fact, it got a little friendlier. The good girl trap. Maya's struggle is something many high-achieving women know well. We call it the good girl syndrome. This often happens